23 years. There's some of us here that one sentence means a lot to. The rest of you are like, what is she talking about? But don't worry, your friends and neighbors will catch you up in the break. What am I talking about? Well, my name is Louise Godbold. I'm the executive director of ECHO, who's putting on this conference. Much to my surprise, I acquired a new identity about 2 years ago because I came forward about Harvey Weinstein. And all of a sudden, everything else I'd ever done in my life was inconsequential because now I'm a Weinstein survivor. So that's why we were talking about 23 years. The sentence just came down. And yes, not that I enjoy someone's demise, but he won't be able to hurt people. That's what's important to me. Yes. There are going to be several of my silence breaker friends here because they wanted to help. Many of the Weinstein silence breakers, but also Toback, Cosby, Russell Simmons, R. Kelly, we've all come together because you know what? There's strength. There's power and there's strength in this sisterhood that we've created. We'll let a few boys in as well. So you might see them walking around, and as a result, because it's a sentencing day, I promise I did not plan this when we booked the dates 2 years ago for this conference. Did not plan it would be on sentencing day. But you will also see some film crews, news crews wandering around because they figured it out. 10 Weinstein survivors plus 6 other silence breakers of high-profile cases all in one place. So that you'll see that. But we have asked them to be respectful of the fact that we do have a do not film area. Where is the do not film area? In the back here. So if you do not want your image caught on camera or your boss doesn't know that you're here, that is where you should sit. We've also asked them not to film the breakouts or the listening circles. But you may see people doing interviews in little corners. So if you just don't want to be on camera, just go around them. And feel free, if you're asked if you would want to comment, if you would like to comment and talk about the work that you do, please feel free. This is a conference for all of us. This is a conference about survivors stepping into our power and voice. So if you want your voice to be heard by BBC, NBC, who else have we got here? Variety, any of these people, feel free. Alrighty, so the elephant in the room. Who was awake last night thinking about the coronavirus? Yeah. It's scary, right? It's scary times. And just acknowledging that we are all concerned because this is uncharted territory. We don't know what we're dealing with exactly. So as you could see, this facility, it's a health foundation, if you don't know the California Endowment. And they put those rather scary notices on the door. We came to drop off equipment. I'm like, oh, are we not allowed in? But if you read what's on there, it's all the stuff that you've heard before, but I'll just go over it again. You know, if you're having cough, sneezes, fever, please go home and get the medical care you need. The other advice, I'm not going to stand here and tell you the other advice because you know it. So come on, someone help me. What is the other advice? Wash your hands. Right, wash your hands. What else? Don't stick your fingers in your mouth. Yes, that's good. Huh? Don't touch your face. Are you all like trying not to touch your face? Yes, it's coughing and sneezing into your elbow. We also put you a little bit further apart than normal. Normally we have 10 people per table, but we've given you a little bit of distance. And what else? Is there anything else? Did I miss something? Oh, yeah, that's the most important. Thank you. Yes, so we have a new and rather awkward way of greeting each other. The preferred one, I think, is elbow bumps. I did see some people on the internet doing the ankle thing, but they are not thinking about women wearing stilettos. You will get a skewered ankle if you do that. So anything creative, let's see what we can come up with. The Echo Conference forms of greeting. So I know you to be a creative lot, so I'm sure we'll come up with something. So the title of this conference is "And Still We Rise," because one of the things that my fellow silence breakers and I have really, really lamented is, and to the crews who've already filmed us and have done this, I forgive you, but there's always us with our hands in our laps, wringing our hands, and it's the sad survivor, and it's the story of, you know, how much we've been harmed, which many people were, and yet it's only half the story, because we're still here, and we're leading lives that are meaningful, we're helping other people. You know what, we actually have fun once in a while, strange as it might seem, and the very famous poem, "And Still I Rise" by Maya Angelou, really captures that. And that's why we kind of borrowed that title. And because it's a collective, called this "And Still We Rise." And actually, I do believe we have Lily Bernard, who is a Cosby survivor. Okay, so that's her identity in the last 3 years, but her lifetime identity is that she is an artist, an acclaimed artist, and she will be doing the art workshop in the breakouts. And I just saw her coming up here, and we're going to start the conference by her reading the poem. So, but as she's coming in, let me just make sure that you have all the other bits and pieces of information you need. So this is a conference celebrating our power. This is a conference celebrating our resilience. And we're not really getting deep into people's trauma histories. It's not really the place to do that. We can't support you in the way that you might need. And yet we know that this is a subject that can sometimes unexpectedly, something will hit home. And sometimes people can get overwhelmed. And so just in case, we actually do have a couple of mental health professionals. Erica, I see you sitting right there. Would you mind raising your hand or standing up so people can see Erica? Dr. Holmes. Dr. Holmes is one of our mental health professionals who will be offering support. And should you need a little extra support, she will be there in the regulation room, or Andy Fetzner is the other person who will be coming. And any volunteer can help you find the regulation room. The other thing I should let you know is we are really bad at social media, because it's like, have we got the centerpieces? Have we got the swag bags? Oh, social media. Darn, we forgot that. So please help us with tweeting or Instagramming or whatever those things are that you will know about and I don't. Echo Conf, C-O-N-F 2020 is the hashtag we've been using, so please. And the last is Echo Conf, C-O-N-F, short for conference, 2020 is the hashtag we've been using. So that would be great if you could do that. And then the last thing to let you know is we have listening circles tomorrow, which is a space so that all of your voices can be heard. Because we didn't want this just to be the traditional conference where someone's up here talking and you're thinking of all your own stories of resilience and empowerment, and you're just bursting to be able to talk about your experiences, and there's never room for that. So we're having listening circles so that can happen. And the facilitators, there's a bio and a picture, and then you can sign up under which listening circle you'd like to be part of. So Lily, I gave you a great introduction. So it's probably just as well you weren't here, otherwise your head would be so swelled by now. Would you do us the honor?
May I fist bump you?
You
Elbow bump you?
you may elbow bump. Thank you. Oh, two. Okay. Good woman. All right. So, do you need to take a breath?
I want to say congratulations to you and all your Harvey Weinstein survivor sisters. 20
Thank you.
Kate, are there any other Harvey Weinstein survivors in the house besides Lou and Kate?
Lauren and Catherine and Caitlin's just coming in,
So happy for you.
and more are on their way. This mic isn't on, so you want to use that.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
I'm gonna go sit down while you do this.
Okay, so we're going to do this poem by Maya Angelou called Still I Rise in a sort of public engagement way. So you'll hear her repeat the phrase, I rise. Everybody, let's say that. I rise. So when I point up to the sky in memory of Maya Angelou, like this, we will all say together. Can you say it louder? I rise. Okay. Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room? Just like moons and like suns, with the certainty of tides. Just like hopes springing high. Still, I'll rise. Do you want to see me broken? Bowed head and lowered eyes. Shoulders falling down like teardrops. Weakened by my soulful cries. Does my haughtiness offend you? Don't you take it awful hard. 'Cause I laugh like I've got gold mines digging in my own backyard. You may shoot me with your words. You may cut me with your eyes. You may kill me with your hatefulness. But still, like air, I'll rise. Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise up from a past that's rooted in pain. I rise. I'm a black ocean, leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide, leaving behind nights of terror and fear. I rise into a daybreak that's wondrously clear. I rise, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, now really loud, I rise. Thank you, Maya Angelou.
Somehow an elbow bump seems inadequate after that. But it's a heart bump. Heart bump. Alrighty. How are you all doing? Okay? Yeah? So, I am not accustomed to making statements that are not backed by science. Aren't you thrilled? So I wanted to take you through a little exploration of why we as survivors need to insist that we have the power and control over our own lives and especially our own recovery. And by the time you leave here, you will have this so well down, reasoned. I hope that this will equip you if anyone ever tries to take your power away. And for those of you, I imagine even if you're here as a service provider, probably you are a trauma survivor as well. When we do our trainings, we do one-day trainings in trauma and resilience. And it's mostly service providers who come, but within half an hour, everyone's talking about themselves and their own story. And when we do the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study questionnaire, most people in the room are survivors. So I'm assuming that you're survivors. But we're also going to be talking about, if you are a service provider, how can you set the stage for survivors to become empowered? Because you don't empower them. That's the important thing to remember. Because if you are giving your power to someone else, you're not really empowering them. You're just loaning them your power, right? So that's a contradiction of terms. But let's just make sure that we all understand what we're talking about here, because here am I, Weinstein survivor, it's Lily, Cosby survivor. Clearly there's a theme here, sexual assault survivors. And yet trauma, what happens to our bodies and our brains, is pretty much the same whatever kind of trauma you experience. So let's just look at trauma itself. For those of you who haven't been to one of my trainings, for those who have, this is a review, okay? But what are we talking about? What is trauma? Why does it have such an effect on us? It's danger. Some kind of danger that we perceive, whether it's in the emotional or the physical realm. And we are wired to respond to danger. All of our survival mechanisms go into place. And it doesn't matter whether it's not traumatic to somebody else looking from the outside. And I always talk about one of our staff who was talking about being traumatized by a goose. And we would laugh, because we're mean like that sometimes. But we would laugh, and then we realized when she was 5 years old and being chased by a goose, that really was, in her mind, a life and death situation. So we stopped laughing after that. So no one else gets to tell you what is traumatic. It's how you experience it. It's how your brain, how the fear center in your brain perceives something. So that's the first thing to remember. It is by definition overwhelming. So when we see all these stories of the action heroes who leap from cliff to cliff, paraglide to safety, scale a wall, or whatever they do, or get into some big fight. I just saw Birds of Prey. Have you seen that movie? Yeah. It's a lot of fighting. But the truth is that most of us in a traumatic situation, we don't fight and we don't run away. Most of us freeze. And there's a very good reason for that, because most of us have been conditioned since our childhood how to respond to danger. And when you're a little kid, especially if it's an adult, you figure it out pretty fast. This person's too big for me to fight, and I'm not going to survive very long if I run away. And so this is not even a conscious thing. This is a complete instinctive thing. You freeze. So now we're beginning to introduce why it is so important that trauma survivors have power and control. Because if you have been out of control, in that you weren't able to protect yourself physically or emotionally, every time that happens in your life, it's going to remind you of that feeling, of that trauma. And so the question I always ask at my trainings, if you were out of control, you couldn't control the situation, and you got hurt, what might you want to do for the rest of your life? I've got lots of people nodding at me. Have control, exactly. And so I always say, let's be a little bit kinder to control freaks, because probably something happened and they want to stay in control. It makes sense. You end up feeling helpless, and it also changes the way that you see the world. This is profound, the impact of trauma. It changes your trust in people. It changes your perception of whether the world is a safe place or not. Oops. So now, I'm going to quote this lady a lot, Judith Herman. She wrote a book called Trauma and Recovery, and it was back in the 90s. And in those days, people thought trauma was something that returning veterans experienced and maybe rape survivors, but they didn't really understand. And she was saying, no, because I've been working with concentration camp survivors and prisoners of war and hostages, and it's different. She's saying it's different. If it's a one-off thing or like a whole period of time where you have been subjected to totalitarian control, it has a different impact, because you then get that cumulative effect. And that's what we call complex trauma. Who else, other than hostages and concentration camp survivors, can be subject to totalitarian control? Children, exactly. And many of us did grow up in households like that. Like, what are you crying about? I'll give you something to cry about. Does that sound familiar? Don't give me any of your lip. That's what we'd say in Britain. Parents would say. So many of us have experienced that in our childhoods. So now here's the key. And by the way, you do have some of these slides in your folder. I just picked out some of the key ones that you might want to remember. But this is what Judith Herman says. Trauma robs the victim of a sense of power and control over her own life. Therefore, the guiding principle of recovery is to restore power and control to the survivor. Can I hear an amen? Amen, right. And yet, there's a problem. The problem is, most of us have grown up in a power over family, in a power over society. We went to schools where they use power over techniques. We probably work for an institution, a corporation, even, dare I say it, a non-profit, where there are very many power over strategies. And this whole idea of allowing someone else to have some of that power, the power with model, is actually kind of foreign to the way that we've been brought up. And by the way, we do trauma-informed parenting classes, and when we talk about power with, not power over, all the parents are freaking out, because they're imagining a scenario where the kid sits and gets to negotiate how many days of the week they have ice cream for breakfast. That's not what we're talking about. But you see this power over dynamic? It produces a lot of shame. This power with dynamic, we're not crazy idealists. We know that there's always going to be in human groups differentiations in the power. There's always going to be. And the question is not whether we all get rid of our power, because power is good. You can do stuff with power. But it's about using your power to help other people. That's the power with approach. Does this all sound fairly reasonable to you so far? Fairly simple? Yeah? It's not rocket science. And yet, this is not how we operate in the world. And I'm going to read you this quote because I think it's really encapsulates it. It's by somebody called Rob Kogel. And he said, "To be sure, human beings have an innate ability to tell others what they feel and need without judgment. Trouble is, we are taught an alien tongue at a young age and soon become fluent in it. This is the language of right and wrong, better and worse, normal and abnormal, judgment and blame. It is the language of coercion and control, dominance and submission, manipulation and invalidation. It is the language of hierarchy and power over." So we don't want that, right? We don't want that. But if you look in your folders, you'll see you have one of our infographics. We have tons of these things because we like making infographics. We have them on our website on the resources page, and you can download them for free. And this was our first one, our trauma-informed arrow. And have a little look, because what we did was, first of all, we realized that to become trauma-informed is not a dichotomy. One day you are, one day you're not. Or one day you're not, one day you are. It's a journey. This arrow is taking you on a journey. And we listed out some of the concepts, some of the thought patterns that are in the power over sphere, and then kind of what we're hoping we can move towards. So this is an opportunity for you to say hello to your neighbor. Because I'm just going to give you a couple of seconds to talk to your neighbor and see if you can pick out something on there that you didn't even think about was power over. Something that you think or believe, but you didn't even realize it's kind of a power over. And have a think about, what might I change? What can I do to create a more power with society, environment, workplace, home? I'm going to give you a few minutes just to do that. You are allowed to talk. You're so well behaved. I was a teacher for a brief while, and this never happened. Never. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to talk to your neighbor. We do this in our trainings because, I don't know about you, but I hate it when somebody's shouting at me. And so we do this, and then everybody, when you notice, you put up your hand and bring your conversation to an end. That's the idea. Anyway, some people get really sophisticated. They have their hand up and they're still talking to their neighbor. But human beings, we're so adaptable, aren't we? Anybody have an aha moment that they want to share? Just quickly. Of course, you would be all the way over there, wouldn't you? But yes, share your aha moment with us, please.
So I thought it was actually surprising on the list that helping is something that is using our power to control another person. And I was thinking specifically, I have a 3-year-old, and there are some times where it's just frustrating. Just get your shoes on, let's go, we gotta go. And so instead of being patient, taking that time, letting her figure it out, I'll help. I'll do it, right? So it was really interesting just to be more mindful of that, of how can I empower her to learn by herself. Be patient.
Marcella? Yes. Thank you, Marcella. Anybody else? I have one more person so we can get through the material. Anyone else have an aha? Yes.
Well, I think along those same lines, I've worked so hard on healing myself after the trauma on so many levels that when people share with me, I'll be like, oh, this is what I learned, and this is what's happening in your brain, and blah, 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 blah. But I need to like step back and just listen and let people have their experience.
That is so important. Diana, that is so important. We talk a lot at ECHO about empathy and the need for empathy. And I think the most common mistake about what empathy is someone tells you their story and you're like, that thing happened to me. That exact thing happened to me. Which you're trying to say, I get it. I know how you feel. But what you're really doing is then making it all about you and your story. And we do that often. So it's a real challenge to be quiet and to hold the space, which we're going to be asking you to do in the listening circles. It's listening. Not talking, listening circles, holding space for other people. So now I'm going to blow your minds. We have this thing, I've been talking about trauma-informed care because in health and human services, it's the buzzword. I don't know if you're all familiar. I know many of you are here in health and human services. But trauma-informed is the new sexy thing. And they talk about valuing lived experience. Well, that's progress. That survivor wisdom and insight provides the illustration and context to what might be a more academic understanding, for example, of trauma. And it's survivor focused. Well, what's not to love about that? That sounds pretty good, right? It sounds like the power, the balance of power, is in the survivor's court. Well, not so much. Not so much, because I have found lived experience is like a garnish. You know, like the piece of parsley you put on the plate of sandwiches. I talked to somebody who was setting up an international trauma conference, and I said, do you have anybody, or any of your speakers who, note my bias, actually have lived experience? And she's like, oh yeah, at the end of 2 days, we have somebody who comes on at the end and talks about their lived experience. So it's a kind of a wheel on a survivor situation. And I always say, if my sink is blocked, I want a plumber who's actually unblocked a sink before, rather than someone who's just read about it in a book. So to differentiate, I talk about direct experience. And there was a very interesting, I'm old, so I have a historical perspective, but I remember when the re-entry work was happening, helping people, formerly incarcerated people, to re-enter. And I was part of a big gathering of the DA, the prison warden union, law enforcement. They had this big round table, like 30 people on this committee. And I was working with a faith-based organization. And one of the people from that faith-based organization came with me one time. And he had been incarcerated at some point in his life. And so they rolled out this plan, $5 million they'd spent on this plan. And this is 20 years ago. And the guy beside me starts laughing and laughing and laughing. And everyone got a little bit uncomfortable. Like, what is he laughing at? And he's like, you're going to tell me this again? How are you going to give the person who's coming out of prison, how are you going to hook them up with community services? You're going to give them a piece of paper? Who's going to give them that piece of paper? The prison guard? And he starts laughing and laughing and laughing again. And he says, the first thing you're going to do when you get outside those gates is you're going to tear up anything that reminds you of your time in prison, and especially anything given to you by a prison guard. So there were 30 very glum faces at that point. Because and then there was a group in Oakland, and I can't remember the name, but it was a group of formerly incarcerated people who got together and started organizing people who had been formerly incarcerated, and they started leading the reentry movement. And that's obviously what needed to happen, because who knows better than someone who's been through that experience? And that's why I say, don't just have us as context. We should be leading this movement. Thank you. I'll give you somewhere to sign up later for a petition. No, seriously, the Me Too voter, where people were going to come, but it's kind of all last minute, and travel is difficult. But we said, yes, please come, because we are a body. As survivors, we are a body who can influence, for example, politics, and so we should. And lastly, rather than just being survivor-focused, I'm all about, as I said, this movement being survivor-led. Because for those of you who may have thought different, if it's not empowering the survivor, whatever you're doing is not trauma-informed. You might know a lot about trauma. You might have come up with some rinky-dink ideas about how to make your facility more trauma-informed, but if it's not empowering for the survivor, it's not trauma-informed. Is that making sense? Right? It's a simple truth, but one that seems to have gone past most people. So rather than power over, we're looking at power with. Rather than blaming people, we're respecting people's experience. Rather than saying you're crazy, which I've heard that many times in the context of survivors, we're saying it makes sense. Now that I understand your trauma history, whatever your reaction to things, it makes sense given the context of your trauma history. And rather than having people around us who are experts, we're asking them to be enlightened or compassionate witnesses. And rather than people being there to fix us, we want them to support our healing. And then the helping thing. What if people in the helping professions saw it about being about learning from the survivor? And then in the mental health field, we often talk about symptoms and behavior, but we need to be looking at what happened to somebody, looking at the whole person in history. And I know some of you in here are mental health professionals, and some of you are service providers, and many service providers come to our training. So this is not an anti-service provider rant up here. But I think if you come to our training, we'll talk about trauma roles and how we circle around those trauma roles. But this is another quote from Judith Herman, which I think is really worth pulling out, because it explains what's going on. Because I know that everybody in this room has a very good heart and is very well intentioned, and that's my experience of all the service providers I've met, because we sure aren't doing it for the money. Judith Herman says, as a defense against the unbearable feeling of helplessness, the practitioner may try to assume the role of rescuer. The more helpless and dependent and incompetent the client feels, the worse her symptoms become. So I say to you, anyone who says they're working to help you towards your recovery, but are not letting you step into your power and voice, are not really helping. They may think they are, they may have every intention, but that's not what's going on. And one of the things that we do, the acid test, when we do the training around how to be trauma-informed and support survivors, we always say, in the end, it isn't actually what you do or what you say. As Maya Angelou says in this quote, It's about how you make people feel. How does that person feel at the end of it? How do you feel after you've been to your medical facility, for example? Do you feel more in control? Do you feel more powerful? Do you feel like your rights and your dignity have been respected? Are you kidding me? Sitting there in your paper gown and having complete strangers in the middle of a hallway say, how many pregnancies? How many babies? There's a whole world of sadness that may lie between those two questions, and you're right there in the middle of the hallway. So it's about, in the end, how you as a survivor feel. And that's the measure of how well you're being supported. And I'm saying that we should advocate for ourselves. So I have both hats. I'm a service provider and a trauma survivor. But what I'm saying is survivors need to advocate for being able to step into their power and voice. All right, so some people will say that's all very well, but some people are so caught up in their trauma, they're not in a place yet where they can advocate for themselves. So just to give you a little bit more context, let's talk about the 3 stages of recovery, because I think that's really important. And Judith Herman, I promise you that's not my nom de plume, my alter ego. She really does exist. I quote her so much. It feels like she's my alter ego sometimes. But she talks about the 3 stages of recovery as safety, remembrance and mourning, and reconnection. And when I first saw this, it was a kind of a revelation, because a lot of people get stuck in stage 2. A lot of people actually go through all of that crud and don't even realize there's a stage 3. And sometimes people are forced into creating their coherent narrative without safety having been established, which is really dangerous. And I was talking to a survivor yesterday. When something happens like a Harvey Weinstein, for me it was 30 years ago. But for some people, they hadn't processed it yet. And suddenly it was like, speak up or forever hold your peace. And maybe they weren't even feeling safe about doing that. So people sometimes get forced into that. And this is to remind me to tell you that this progression is not linear. You don't wake up one day and go, I'm in stage 2 now. I'll put it on my calendar when I'm going to be in stage 3. It's a continual revisiting, feeling even safer. So you can do even more work around the remembrance. So you can do even more work around reconnecting. And what do I mean about safety? What does that look like? I don't mean that you erect a fort around yourself. Safety is being able to find safety for yourself. Silly little example, but I was in a yoga class back in the day where I had time for yoga classes. And this lady comes and she puts her mat like an inch next to mine in this empty studio. So I'm being very British about this. I'm like, I should say something, but I don't want to be rude, but I should say something. And I got all hot and bothered about it. And then I finally realized, wait a minute, I have the power to find safety for myself. I can pick up my mat and I can move to where there's more space. Well, that's a very simple example, but that's what I mean about finding safety for yourself and learning to self-regulate, learning when these emotions come up, how to calm down your nervous system. We don't have a lot of time to get into that, but the stage 2, that's really about developing your coherent narrative. A coherent narrative is really powerful because it takes your trauma memory out of the fear center of your brain and lays it down as a coherent memory. And then stage 3 is reconnecting with others if you've lost trust because the people who were supposed to protect you betrayed you. Not being stuck in the past anymore, actually being able to contemplate a future. And we won't be able to get into the 3 parts of the brain, but come to our training and I'll tell you all about that. But it's also connecting the 3 parts of the brain. So we can advocate for ourselves in any of these 3 stages. It's important that we do, because remember what Judith Herman says, the guiding principle of trauma recovery is, now she says that power and control is restored. I don't word it quite that way. We need to be able to step into our power and our voice. Because, believe it or not, we are resilient. What does that mean? Well, we've made some successful adaptations. It has been successful, otherwise we wouldn't be alive. Another way of looking at resilience is to say that we are able to live fully in the present moment and thrive while managing the activities of daily living. Well, let's just say that's an aspiration for me. I don't know I'm there yet. But that's resilience. And do you know, there's actual science to say that many of us who've experienced trauma have developed special abilities. So rather than always focusing on all of the crud that comes up, and it does, we're able to rapidly shift attention from one task to another, because maybe you've always been scanning the horizon for danger, so you don't get tunnel visioned. You are able to be able to switch from one thing to another. Being able to tune into social emotional cues. Maybe we had a parent who was volatile emotionally, and we got really good at being able to detect even like a twitch of an eyelid or a curling of a finger. We knew when to make ourselves scarce, or to offer to do the dishes, or whatever it was. We get really, really good at those things. And here's a weird one. Apparently, we get better with muscle memory tasks, like learning to drive a stick shift. I don't know what happened with me then, because that and spatial awareness, no, didn't happen. But now that you've met your neighbor, now I'm going to invite you to talk to your whole table and to think about what are your superpowers? What are the things that you have developed? What are the adaptations, the successful adaptations that you've made? Looks like there's some great conversations happening. I hope you'll continue these conversations in the break. Did anybody have an aha that they would like to share? Ridden's got the mic in the back here. It's fine if it was just a little too personal to share with the whole world. Okay. What was said at the table stays at the table. Oh, you know what? I just realized I didn't do that. I didn't do agreements, did I? That's what happens when you don't sleep the night before the conference. Oh, okay. All right, can we just wind back to 9 o'clock? Because I forgot the most important thing. So when we do trainings, we always set out some agreements to begin with, just to kind of create a frame for what's happening. And in your folder, you'll see trauma-informed meeting guidelines. And we were asked to put that together. And they're guidelines. It's not rules. Remember? Power over likes rules. Power with likes making agreements. So when you do your listening circles, because it will be very important to contain what happens there, we will create agreements. And one of the things, the thing that most people really want to do is say that the stories stay, the lessons leave. That whatever is said, it's that person's story. You don't have permission to go and tell that person's story, but you can extract the lesson. Another one that's very popular is step forward, step back. So that, because you've been in those trainings, right, where there's that one person who has so much to say, and they probably have a lot of really good stuff to say, but by the end of the training, you're like, oh, I wish they would just shut up. Come on, be real. Be real. That's what happens, right? Especially if you're a person, and this happened to me when I was living in countries where, English wasn't the first language, and I would have to think about my cases and declensions and where the verb went, and by the time I'd figured out what I wanted to say, everyone had moved on. And some people are just like that anyway. They want to think through what they say, and then the conversation's moved on. So we say, if you have a big voice and you're used to using it, we ask you to step back. And if you are not maybe so confident about speaking up, take a risk and step forward. That's another agreement that we often make. Some other examples are all there. Again, that's one of the things that's on our website, free for you to download. And the other thing that hasn't really come up in here is sometimes you're in a meeting. We were in a safety meeting, a entertainment industry safety meeting, where they were talking about how to create safety, and a lady disclosed her sexual assault story for the first time. And it was obviously very harrowing for her because she had never really processed it before. But to be quite honest, it was harrowing for everyone else as well, because she kind of wanted to tell all the details, to kind of get it all out finally. And it was really hard for some of the people who had similar histories having to hear all that. And so in a meeting like that, we usually say headlines only. You can talk about what happened to you. You say, as a result of being sexually abused when I was 8 years old. That's the headline, without having to go into what we call all the gory details. So that's another popular agreement. So what do you think? Those 3 examples I just gave, they sound good to you? I see nods of agreement. Okay, we did agreements. Great. I'm going to talk about something that goes a little beyond resilience, which is called post-traumatic growth. I heard somebody giggling over there. They read the slide. My grandma used to say this: what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. She left school when she was 12. Little did she know that she was quoting Nietzsche. Not bad, huh? So there's several things that can lead to post-traumatic growth. And guess what? We have an infographic. We have an infographic for that. But I thought you'd be interested, seeing as this conference is all about empowerment and resilience. What are those things that can help us grow beyond trauma? Optimism, perception of control, there's that word again, coping style, and your sense of self. Well, what do we mean about optimism? This guy here, the Vice Admiral James Stockdale, he was a prisoner of war in Vietnam. And when he finally got out, after spending several years in solitary, people said, well, what was the difference? How come you survived and other people didn't? And he said, well, there were people who would say, we'll be out by Christmas. And then Christmas would come and Christmas would go. And then they say, well, we'll be out by Easter. Or we'll be out by July 4th. And those dates would come and they would go. And he said those people died of a broken heart. So what he was recommending is optimism, yes, but not the Pollyanna kind of optimism. Optimism that takes a good, long, hard look at the facts and is tempered by that reality. Seeing as I love this word control, let's look at the second factor, the perception of control over events. That's Louise reading from her textbook. Well, what do we mean by that? Well, there's primary control. Like if those flowers suddenly burst into flames, I could throw water over them. I have some primary control over that. Secondary control is finding a way to deal with a situation when you can't actually change it. And you all know this because it's in that prayer. You all familiar with that prayer? Shall we say it together? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference, which they call cognitive flexibility, the wisdom to know the difference. The other thing that's going to influence your growth is your personal coping style. And this is where Louise does the Cosmo version of trauma and resilience training, because there's a quiz in your folder. If you were curious about what is my coping style, so why don't you have a little look at that? Can you find it? It's not the slides, it's a separate handout. Maybe if someone finds it, they can hold it up so everyone can see. Nope, that's the inventory, not the color one. Yeah, the black and white one. Black and white one. So have a little look and see what your coping style is. No, not the color one, black and white. Anyone who's got it, could they hold it up for the others? Yes. Yes, thank you. And you probably find that you don't fit all in one category. You probably find there's bits from all of those that apply. So have a little look. When you're done, then I'll know that we're ready to move on. And you can take it home and look at it more closely. But none of these are bad, by the way. These are just different ways of coping, and they're all good. They all have a purpose. So that first one, active coping, those are the kind of skills that we want to instill in our children, right? Problem solving, planning, focus, self-restraint, seeking support. A lot of people don't realize that actually reaching out for support is a really positive, healthy thing that shows that you have good coping skills. And then the other one, acceptance and positive reinterpretation. In situations where you don't have a control over something, like your trauma was in the past and maybe your abuser is dead or in a different country, or for whatever reason they're too powerful and you can't do anything about it. One of the skills in this type of coping is to use optimism and humor. And actually, optimism and humor are the best predictors of post-traumatic growth. So it's not a weakness that you can't actually put out the flowers that are on fire. It's not going to be a hindrance to your ability to cope. It could actually be the root of your growth, being able to develop some optimism and humor around that. I know that in different cultures, we have a lot of dark humor. In Britain, we have a lot of dark humor. I was married to a Mexican from Mexico, and our humor was very similar. And it's kind of like people have been through hard things. We develop a sense of humor to be able to handle it. And then the last one, which sounds like it's probably a bad thing, avoidance coping. But in the short term, it can actually be a really good idea. In the short term, if you're having a really hard time at work and your coworkers are stressing you out, maybe it is a good idea to go home and watch a really good TV show and just escape for a little bit and not have it go round and round and round in your brain. Of course, so short term, that's helpful. Long term, not so much, because you're really just burying it. So whatever kind of coping style you have, none of them are bad or wrong. We just use all of them at different times. And then lastly, having a strong sense of self. What does that mean? It means the coherent narrative. Remember stage 2 of recovery from trauma? Having a purpose in life. I think a lot of the silence breakers I've gotten to know have felt that the one good thing to come out of all of this is that we have banded together and we've worked to change laws. And that sense of purpose and meaning has been part of our growth. So there is actually a lot of science around this post-traumatic growth. Tedeschi and Calhoun are the scientists who've been focusing on this mostly. And they say that after doing all this research, there's 5 areas where we usually experience growth. And just quickly, it's relating to others, realizing that people can help us, a sense of belonging, unity, coming up with new possibilities or reprioritizing our lives, having more strength, being stronger as a result of what we went through, knowing that whatever comes at you, it's like, I've handled worse than this. I'm going to be okay because I've been through worse than this. The spiritual change, I put this under construction because they realized that not everybody is spiritual. But what they do acknowledge is that we all have some kind of external value system that we buy into, even if it's just that we are all one. You hurt one of us, you hurt all of us. That's a kind of a spirituality. So they're working on that part. And then lastly, a greater appreciation of life. So I'm just whizzing through those because I have another quiz for you. I have that color piece of paper, which is for you to look and see. Now, some people say, really, I had to go through all that. You know, builds character. I've got quite enough character, thank you very much. Could I not have developed character and wisdom and all those other things without going through all that crap? It's a fair comment. So when we do this quiz, it's not a quiz, it's a scientific, psychological standard test. But we say, maybe you don't feel it right now, and maybe you're really angry. Some people get really angry because they just, it's too much. This suggestion that all the harm that they experienced is somehow going to work to their good. They don't want to hear it. And so for those people, we say, well, maybe you're not feeling this growth right now, but maybe you can think about where you might experience it later on. So if you want to take a little bit of time doing that, and then I'll let you into the secret of what all the colors mean. If you're still working on it, don't look up, because I'm about to put the slide up that shows you what all those colors mean. So don't let yourself be influenced. So keep working. But for those of you who have finished, that's what those colors mean. So we're not about doing scores. It's just for you to see where do I kind of have 5s? Which color am I getting most of my 4 or 5s? Just to give you a sense of which area might you be growing in. And we'll give those who are still working a little bit more time. I hope this was okay. I felt very much under pressure to do a speech this morning. And I'm like, no, I'm not a speechifier. I'm an educator. So I just did what I do. So for those of you who've been through Trauma and Resilience Part 2, and this is part of what I do in that, apologies. But you knew all the answers, so everyone at your table thinks you're really smart. And then when everyone's finished at your table, or giving someone who's not finished a little bit more time, perhaps you might like to share at your table either the areas that you found that you had grown in or areas you're surprised that you didn't have a lot of growth in, and what those things mean to you. So I'm just going to give you a little bit more time to talk amongst yourselves. So we're just going to wrap this up at this point. And if you still have lots to talk about in terms of your resilience and post-traumatic growth, that's great, because that's what this whole 2 days is about. And I hope that what you're coming away with from this morning is a sense of how resilient you are and how much growth actually you have experienced. And I'm going to close with the most notable of all academics, Pooh Bear, who says, "Promise me you'll always remember." And if you know this, you can say along with me. "You're braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think." Thank you.